James did not come home with excuses. He did not arrive armed with explanations, justifications, or promises spoken too loudly and too late. Instead, he chose silence. Not the kind of silence that hides guilt or avoids responsibility, but a quieter, heavier silence, one shaped by intention. A silence meant to say what words could not. Without ceremony, without rehearsed speeches or emotional declarations, James placed an iPhone 17 Pro Max into Diep's trembling hands. It was not about the phone. It was never about the phone. It was a quiet apology, a promise of care. A reminder that even through absence, exhaustion, and emotional distance, his love for her had not disappeared, it had simply lost its voice. And in that fragile, wordless moment, Diep understood something essential. Sometimes love does not need to be explained to be felt. The house was quiet, but not peacefully so. It was the kind of silence that lingers after damage has already been done. After words were swallowed, after apologies arrived too late to be spoken, outside, the afternoon light crept slowly across the floor, tracing the passing of time, time neither James nor Diep seemed ready to acknowledge. They had not argued loudly. There were no slammed doors, no dramatic exits. Instead, the distance grew in small, almost invisible ways. Unanswered messages, tired eyes, conversations that ended before they truly began. Life had pressed down on James from every direction: work, family expectations, responsibilities he never asked for but could not escape. And Diep, standing quietly beside him, carried her own disappointment without complaint. James noticed the change before he fully understood it. Diep still cooked, she still smiled. She still asked if he had eaten, but something in her warmth had dimmed, like a lamp turned lower rather than switched off. She no longer waited for him to come home, she no longer asked how his day had been. These were not punishments. They were shields. At night, James lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of ordinary life. The hum of the fan, distant dogs barking, a motorbike passing by on the road. Once, those sounds had comforted him. Now they reminded him of how simple love used to feel, back when it seemed effortless. Now love felt fragile, something that required care and attention he had failed to give. "I'm sorry." The words hovered in his chest, heavy and inadequate. "How do you apologize for absence?" For emotional distance? For being physically present but mentally elsewhere? James knew words alone would sound empty now. Diep found comfort in routine. Each morning, she watered the plants, she organized her work. In the evenings, she sat quietly scrolling through an old phone. its cracked screen mirroring her exhaustion. She never complained, and James realized, painfully, that this hurt more than anger ever could. Sometimes love does not break in a single moment. It erodes, slowly, through neglect, exhaustion, and the belief that the other person will always understand. James stood at the edge of that realization, afraid, yet determined. He could not undo the past. But maybe, just maybe, he could begin again, not with grand promises, not with dramatic confessions. But with a small, thoughtful gesture, one that said, without words, "I see you. I remember you." "I'm trying." James had never been good at grand declarations. He could not turn regret into poetry or love into speeches that made people cry. His apologies, when spoken, always sounded awkward, too stiff, too late, so this time, he chose silence again. But a different kind. The idea came to him on an ordinary afternoon, while standing in line at a small electronics store near the main road. The place was crowded. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves. Salespeople repeated the same phrases again and again. It felt painfully normal, and somehow, that made the decision feel right. James remembered how Diep once laughed about her old phone freezing whenever she tried to take photos. How she used it for everything: work, study, staying connected, yet never complained when it failed her. She always adapted, as if her own needs could wait forever. When the salesperson placed the iPhone 17 Pro Max on the counter, its sleek surface catching the light, James hesitated. It was expensive, yes, but more than that, it represented something he feared being misunderstood. He did not want it to feel like compensation, or control. He wanted it to feel like care. He paid quietly, asked for no special packaging, no card, no explanation rehearsed in advance. Just the phone, wrapped simply, like an everyday object meant to be used, not admired. That evening, James came home earlier than usual. Diep was in the kitchen, moving gently between the stove and the sink, her motions calm and practiced. He stood there for a moment, watching her, realizing how many times he had walked past moments like this without truly seeing them. "I bought something for you," he said softly. His voice was unsure. Diep turned, not surprised by the words, but by the way he said them. James placed the small box on the table between them, as if afraid to push it closer. "It's not anything big," he added. They both knew that wasn't entirely true. What he didn't say was that this wasn't about the phone. It was about acknowledging her quiet endurance, about easing a small part of her daily burden. About saying I'm here now, without demanding forgiveness. The box sat unopened. Inside it was more than technology. Inside it was an apology James was still learning how to give. Diep did not open the box right away. That pause, small, almost unnoticeable, made James hold his breath. In real life, moments like these happen quietly, without an audience. Yet they carry the weight of decisions that shape relationships. Diep stood there, fingers resting on the edge of the table, as if reading the meaning of the gesture before touching it. She had received gifts before, some generous, some careless, but this felt different. James was not watching her reaction. He was not smiling expectantly. Instead, he busied himself with small, unnecessary tasks, straightening a chair, wiping a surface already clean. That told her more than words ever could. Finally, she opened the box. The iPhone lay inside, pristine, impossibly new, reflecting the soft kitchen light. Diep felt overwhelmed, not by its value, but by the realization that James had noticed the details of her life. He knew how often her old phone failed her. He knew how much she relied on it. He had listened, even when she thought he hadn't. "This is too much," she whispered. Not out of politeness, but fear. Fear that accepting it meant accepting everything else without being heard. James shook his head gently. "It's not to make up for everything," he said. "It's just something I can do right now." Something softened inside her. She turned the phone on. The screen lit up, clear and bright. For a brief moment, she smiled. A real smile. Unguarded. Warm. James saw it immediately, and the tension he carried loosened, just a little. She didn't thank him right away. Instead, she sat down and began transferring her data. Contacts. Photos. Unfinished messages. An ordinary act, yet deeply symbolic. Moving memories into a space that felt new. In that moment, Diep understood. Love was not in the price of the gift, but in the humility behind it. James was not trying to erase the past. He was standing beside her in the present, offering support without demand. And James realized something too. Sometimes healing does not begin with forgiveness spoken aloud. It begins with understanding, allowed to grow quietly. Night fell without announcement. Streetlights flickered on, one by one. Inside the house, nothing dramatic happened. No promises. No tears. Yet something had shifted. Diep sat on the sofa, the new phone resting in her hands, not admiring it, not exploring its features. She scrolled through familiar names. Reread old messages. James watched from a short distance, careful not to intrude. For the first time in days, he didn't feel the need to explain himself. Can I take a photo? Diep suddenly asked. James looked up, surprised. She lifted the phone. He hesitated, then laughed softly. The camera clicked. The photo wasn't perfect. Uneven lighting, tired eyes, a half smile still learning how to return. But it was honest. It's not very good, she said. James shook his head. It's real. They laughed, quietly, and with that, the tension eased further. They sat together with cups of tea that cooled too quickly. They talked about small things. What to cook tomorrow, errands, a neighbor's dog that barked too much. To anyone else, these conversations would seem trivial. To them, they were bridges. James realized that making up for something didn't always mean grand sacrifice. Sometimes it meant paying attention again. Showing up. Offering something thoughtful and sincere. As the night deepened, Diep placed the phone carefully on the table. She looked at James. Thank you for thinking of me. That was all, and it was enough. The story of James and Diep reminds us that love does not always return with fireworks. Sometimes it comes back quietly, like light through a window, like trust rebuilt through small, everyday care. Love is not measured by expensive gifts or dramatic gestures, but by attention, humility, and timing. Understanding comes before forgiveness. Care begins with noticing. Healing starts small. In the end, love survives not because we are perfect, but because we are willing.